frozen in time for 5,000 years.
This is the world's first replica of Ötzi the Iceman.
61 tattoos arranged in 19 groups across his body.
It all started with a casual hike that turned into a time-traveling discovery. In September 1991, two hikers navigating the rugged landscape of the Ötztal Alps on the Austrian-Italian border stumbled upon something that would make history books gasp. At first glance, they thought it was the remains of a lost mountaineer frozen in time. But what lay half embedded in the glacial ice was far older and far stranger. This was no ordinary body. It was a perfectly preserved mummy, later confirmed to be over 5,000 years old. He would come to be known as Ötzi the Iceman, and from that day forward, archaeology would never be the same. Frozen in time, locked in mystery, not just a body, an unopened chapter of human history, a prehistoric detective case hidden in ice. The Alps gave up a secret no one expected. History doesn't knock, it bleeds through glaciers. His skin was leathery, his limbs contorted, but his story was just beginning. Dating techniques later placed him in the Copper Age, around 3300 BC. This meant Ötzi had walked the earth before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, before the written word itself. He had somehow endured over 5 millennia of ice, rock, and weather without turning to dust. Nature, without meaning to, had created a human time capsule. Researchers were stunned by how intact he was. His clothing, made of fur, grass, and leather, was still draped over his stiff frame. A finely crafted copper axe was strapped by his side, the oldest of its kind ever found. Alongside it, a long bow, a quiver of arrows, and a bearskin hat. Tools that revealed he wasn't just a wanderer. He was prepared, but something was off, something darker. As scientists began to study the body, subtle signs hinted at more than just an ancient man lost in the mountains. There were cuts, bruises, a wound in his shoulder, and the position of his arms suggested distress in his final moments. What was first thought to be a peaceful alpine death was quickly unraveling into a potential murder mystery. The Iceman wasn't just frozen, he was hunted. And this was only the beginning. What followed was one of the most intense forensic investigations in history. But it wasn't just his belongings or his injuries that told the real story, it was his DNA. And when scientists finally cracked it in 2023, what they found shocked everyone. It took over 30 years, but the truth was finally unlocked at the molecular level. After decades of careful preservation, analysis, and debate, scientists did something in 2023 that had never been done before. They fully decoded the genome of Ötzi the Iceman, every single letter of his DNA sequenced with near-perfect clarity. This wasn't just another study, it was a scientific landmark published in the prestigious journal Cell Genomics. And for the first time in history, we had a complete, contamination-free view of what made Ötzi who he was. The Ice Age mystery was no longer frozen, it was wide open, not a fragment, not a theory, the whole human code. This wasn't guesswork, it was a genetic blueprint. Microscopes don't lie, DNA doesn't forget. The frozen past just got louder. We didn't just find answers, we rewrote them. What makes this breakthrough so remarkable is how wrong we had been. Earlier studies of Ötzi's DNA were based on degraded samples, fragments riddled with contamination from modern human handling, bacteria, and the environment. The earlier data gave us a blurry image, like trying to recognize a face through foggy glass, but the 2023 study used ultra-sensitive sequencing technology to go deeper, cleaner, and sharper than ever before. As confirmed by EurekAlert and Science Daily, this was the first time Ötzi's genome was read without noise. We weren't guessing anymore, we were seeing, and what we saw changed everything. This was not just a genetic ID card. Ötzi's newly sequenced DNA uncovered shocking revelations about his ancestry, health risks, appearance, and lifestyle. It challenged our assumptions, even reversed some. Ötzi wasn't who we thought he was, not in his origins, not in his looks, not even in his biology. His identity had been hiding in plain sight, buried in base pairs. What used to be myth was now mapped. With this complete genome, scientists could track the migrations of his ancestors, reconstruct his facial features, detect inherited diseases, and even measure his risk for conditions like diabetes and baldness. It was as if the ancient man himself was finally speaking, and what he had to say was deeply human and shockingly modern, but nothing was more surprising than where he came from. We thought we knew who he was. We were wrong. For decades, researchers assumed that Ötzi the Iceman represented a blend of ancient European bloodlines, part hunter-gatherer, part early farmer. It made sense on the surface. After all, he was found high in the Alps, surrounded by what we assumed were the cultural echoes of a mixed European past. But the 2023 genome analysis flipped that theory upside down. It turns out that 92% of Ötzi's ancestry came from a single, unexpected source: Anatolian farmers, early agriculturalists who migrated from modern-day Turkey thousands of years before he was born. Not a blend, a bloodline. He wasn't European, he was Anatolian. History didn't evolve here, it arrived, a mountain man with Mediterranean roots. The Alps kept a stranger's secret. This wasn't just a statistical surprise, it was a cultural shock. The Anatolian farmers were part of a revolutionary movement that changed everything, the spread of agriculture into Europe around 8,000 years ago. These people didn't just bring seeds and tools, they brought entirely new ways of life. And Ötzi was one of their distant descendants. But what's strange is how pure that lineage remained. His genome revealed almost no genetic input from European hunter-gatherers or steppe herders. This suggests that Ötzi lived in a remarkably isolated alpine population, one that had stayed genetically untouched for generations. His DNA was frozen in time, literally and figuratively. While most Europeans today carry a complex mix of ancestries, Ötzi didn't. He was a time capsule of a very specific migration wave, one that had largely faded or mixed in the centuries since. As highlighted in Science News and Archaeology magazine, his closest modern genetic relatives aren't in Germany, Austria, or Switzerland. They're on an island in the Mediterranean Sea, Sardinia. That's right, modern Sardinians still retain a high percentage of the same Anatolian farmer DNA, making them Ötzi's closest living kin. So Ötzi wasn't a typical European of his time, he was a remnant, a human fossil not just in age but in blood. And now with his ancestry finally decoded, the next question naturally follows: what did he actually look like? Because even that, we got wrong. Sometimes even the eyes of science can be fooled. For over 3 decades, we looked at Ötzi's mummified remains and assumed we knew what he looked like. His leathery, light-colored skin, the traces of reddish pigment in his hair, the hollow, pale figure encased in glacial ice. It all seemed to suggest the classic look of a light-skinned, fair-haired man from prehistoric Europe. But it turns out we were looking at an illusion, because Ötzi's DNA told a completely different story. What you see isn't always what's true. The ice changed his face, the genome revealed it. Skin can lie, genes do not. He wasn't who we pictured, not even close. The real Ötzi had been hiding under our noses. The new analysis revealed traits that rewrote his portrait, literally. Instead of pale skin, Ötzi had dark skin, possibly darker than most modern Europeans. His eyes, brown, not blue or green, and his hair, almost gone. Scientists identified genetic markers linked to male pattern baldness, suggesting he was already balding by the time of his death. So much for the rugged mountain man with a mane of red hair. As Scientific American emphasized, this finding forces researchers and artists to reconstruct ancient humans from the inside out, starting with DNA, not first impressions. But how did the mummy fool us so convincingly? The answer lies in the ice itself. Over thousands of years, the cold, dry conditions of the glacier had altered his tissues. His skin lost pigment and moisture, becoming pale and leathery. His remaining hair was stripped of melanin, making it appear reddish or light brown. What we were seeing wasn't a prehistoric selfie, it was a distorted fossil shaped by time, temperature, and the elements. Ötzi's true face was buried deep inside his genes. And that face tells us something profound. He looked more like someone from Southern Europe, or even North Africa, than Central Europe. He wasn't the stereotypical Ice Age man, he was a complex human with a story written in pigment, protein, and inheritance. And now that we've seen his real face, the only question left is, how did that face meet its end? Ötzi didn't just live through history, he carried it in his blood. With his genome now fully sequenced, scientists could finally zoom in on something even more intimate than ancestry: his health. And the results painted a sobering picture. Ötzi, the hardened alpine traveler, was also a man riddled with vulnerabilities. His DNA revealed a strong genetic predisposition to heart disease, even though he lived thousands of years before industrial diets or modern stress. He also carried markers for diabetes, arthritis, and lactose intolerance, a digestive trait that might have made consuming milk a painful experience. He was tough on the outside but fragile within. A warrior's body, a fragile genome, Stone Age strength, modern day risks. Diseases don't care